From London, this is the Standard Podcast, and I'm Mark Blunden. Coming up in this episode, inside the London Lime Depot, where e-bikes are resurrected. But first, thousands of British farmers marched on Westminster as tractors converged on central London in protest against Labour plans to end inheritance tax exemption. In her first budget last month, Chancellor Rachel Reeves announced farmers with land worth more than £1 million will no longer be able to leave their farms to their children tax-free from 2026. Television presenter turned farmer Jeremy Clarkson was among celebrities at the NFU rally today, where they sought to lobby the Chancellor and MPs.
I'm here to support the farmers. It's that simple. So they need all the help they can get, really, even from me. If she'd have wanted to take out the likes of James Dyson and investment bankers and so on, she would have used a sniper's rifle. But she's used a blunderbuss and she's hit all this lot. It was, as I understand it, it was a very rushed last-minute decision. And I think, we all make mistakes in life, and I think it's time for them to say, you know what, we've cocked this one up a bit and back down. That's my view.
Opposition to what's been dubbed the tractor tax comes amid concerns that other national insurance hikes hitting employers will fuel inflation. Now we're joined from Westminster by the London Standard's chief political correspondent, Rachael Burford, who's been covering the demonstration.
10,000 farmers, that's what the Metropolitan Police are estimating, have descended on White Hart today. And they are absolutely blocking all the way from Downing Street, all the way up to Parliament and around Parliament Square as well. So it's an absolutely massive protest. They set up a stage where they're hearing from lots of farmers from across the country have got up to speak. I think Ollie Harrison, who has become a bit of a kind of YouTube star with his farm in the northwest, he sort of said, do the government even know where our food comes from? There is not a lot of love for the government out there.
Could you give us an overview of what sparked this anger?
This is all to do with inheritance tax changes, basically, which were announced by the Chancellor in the budget. To put it simply, it's about agricultural property relief. That at the moment allows eligible farmland to be inherited with 100% tax relief. And then there's also a thing called business property relief, which can be claimed on qualifying assets such as farmland and equipment and things like that. So if you own a farm and your children are to inherit that farm, you don't pay tax, essentially, inheritance tax on it. Now, the changes the Chancellor announced were from April 2026, the full 100% agricultural property relief will be restricted to the first £1 million, and that's of combined agricultural and business property. So that is sort of rather a large change. And then after that, the relief drops to 50%. So assets above the threshold will be subject to an effective sort of 20% inheritance tax. Obviously, that is less inheritance tax than other people will pay on, normal houses and things like that. But, farmers' point is that it's a very, very hard job. It's you don't get any time off if you're a farmer. They have very small profit margins these days, and they are an important part of British life and food security and things like that. So they say it's unfair, and it will mean many farmers do not take on the farm when their parents die because they just won't be able to afford it.
What's next for these protests and also food security?
All the farmers up on stage today were saying this is the beginning. It is not the end. We're not going to give up on this. Obviously, there's loads of things that farmers can do, and I'm sure they'll be looking at what farmers have done in other countries, particularly France. We've seen, them totally close roads and shut down the country with their agricultural vehicles. So there are a few things they've talked about. Yeah, food supply is one of the big things, but also I think they collect waste from water companies to put on their fields. If they stopped doing that, companies would end up with huge amounts of waste that they wouldn't know what to do with. There's a lot of potential future protests that these farmers could do. And, they're basically out there saying, we're not going to make this easy for the government. We're here to stay and we'll continue talking about this.
What's the government saying? Any plans to repeal these inheritance tax reforms?
At the moment, it's a no. We're not changing our minds. This is, it's not going to affect that many. It'll only affect the richest farmers, is what the government is saying. And they're still getting a lot more relief than people who aren't inheriting farmland. get people who are just inheriting houses and property and other bits and pieces. So the government are standing firm at the moment, but obviously farmers do have a huge amount of support, as you can see on the streets today. And they are willing to make this a really big issue and a real thorn in the side for government ministers over the next few months.
Let's go to the ads coming up in part 2. What are Lime Bike's plans to expand in the capital? The London Standard's transport editor Ross Lydall reports from the company's Tottenham depot. Why not hit follow on this podcast in the meantime and give us a rating? Welcome back. Electric Lime bikes have overtaken Boris bikes as London's preferred method of pay-as-you-go transport on two wheels. With the ability to pay per minute, last year their usage mushroomed by 10% every month. But at what cost? Complaints from councils and residents include these bikes being ditched across pavements. Brent Council even threatened to ban the firm over the problem, while last week the Times reported a news photographer witnessed 84 Lime bike cyclists jumping a single red light in 1 hour. So what's the future for this power-assisted pedalling expansion further across the capital? The London Standard's transport editor Ross Lydall visited Lime's servicing depot in White Hart Lane in Tottenham to find out.
When it comes to hire bikes in London, there is one undisputed market leader, Lime. I've come to the Lime depot here in Tottenham to see what goes on behind the scenes. This depot is one of two that Lime has in London. The other is in Bermondsey, and it's an absolute hive of activity. And there are around 70 to 80 staff here, and the depot is open on a 24/7 basis. The aim is to get these bikes into the depot and back out onto the streets, fully repaired, within 24 hours. There are around 20,000 Lime bikes in London, and they're used for millions of journeys each year. But they're not popular with everyone. Some Londoners see them as a menace because of the way some riders just simply abandon them on the side of roads or on pavements. One borough, Brent, even threatened to ban Lime, although a deal was eventually struck which allows Lime to remain in operation in Brent.
Ross asked Hal Stevenson, the UK Director of Policy at Lime, about the company's agreement with Brent Council to stop their bikes being banned for causing hazards.
Our mission is to get more people out of cars and onto bikes. As part of that, we need to take space away from cars and provide it to bikes. So we're working with Brent to provide data and funding to set up 200 dedicated parking locations that will be based all across the borough, and people will have to leave their bikes in from mid next year. We need more dedicated spaces for people to leave their bikes. And we're working with boroughs on that. We're providing data that shows where people want to park, and crucially funding as well, so that we can help the boroughs get the parking in. This year we've spent already £1 million on providing dedicated parking infrastructure in London, and we're going to be investing a lot more into that next year as well.
And Stevenson was also asked about combating the scourge of dumped bikes and about whether behaviour can be influenced to help stop riders jumping red lights.
So that we're always engaging with our riders, making sure they're using the service responsibly, whether that's stopping at red lights or parking in the right place. It's really important for your own safety and for the safety of others that when you see a red light, you stop. So we want to work with the police really closely to make sure that we can give them any data or support them in any way in helping to crack down on that type of behaviour, because it's bad for cycling, right? All of the work we're doing here is to get more people on bikes to help make London be a more active and sustainable place. And if you get a reputation for people cycling through red lights, that it detracts from it. So we want to work with cycling organisations, with the police, with other interested parties to make sure that people are behaving as they should.
And Ross joins us now. We earlier heard some sound from your video where there was some quite serious bike maintenance being undertaken. How much punishment do these bikes take, and what's the most common form of damage?
They do get a bit of a kicking, I guess you could say, these bikes. They're very sturdy bikes, very heavy, but often we'll see them knocked over either through some sort of bad lads not looking after them, or just vandals who give them a shove and they go down like a pack of cards, which is obviously a huge nuisance to many pedestrians. But they say that the biggest problem they have in terms of damage to the bikes is largely on the wheels, especially the
front wheels. So they have actually improved the parts that are on these bikes to try and make them stronger. I think the wheels suffer because of the way some riders will bump them up and down aggressively on the side of pavement edges, on the curbs. And the back wheel, the issue there is that's where the motor is, the electric motor. So quite often that would have to be replaced as well. The other thing is what they call the fender, or the sort of rear mudguard, this black mudguard on the back wheel. It can often be kicked, but it's a very strong plastic. And these bikes are designed to last. The aim is that these will survive for at least 5 years, although they may need some repairs along the way.
And what was your takeaway from your visit and interview in terms of Lime's popularity?
Well, what's quite clear is exactly how popular these Lime bikes are. We often see recent press coverage focusing on the nuisance factor, the fact that they can often be blocking pavements. But on the other side of the equation is the fact that millions of rides have been taken on these bikes each year. Hal talked about an astronomical increase in usage. He said just in the first half of this year, during commuting hours, they were used for 11.5 million trips. Now, that is a really, really big number. And when you see that London Cycling Campaign, for example, says that cycling now accounts for about a third of daily tube journeys, such as the popularity of cycling, many of these rides have been taken on Lime bikes. So, yes, they might be a nuisance to some, but they are a bit of a godsend to probably many others. The other thing to say is that Lime gave the clear indication that not only does it want to be here and to stay, but it wants to expand. It's looking to be in 20 of the 33 boroughs by next year.
And that's the Standard. For the latest news, head over to standard.co.uk. This podcast is back tomorrow at 4 p.m.